Welcome to the LOVE Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Frigon. You may know me from Project Love, where we focus on operational excellence, but here we go deeper. We're your go-to for raw, empowering conversations on entrepreneurship and stepping into your CEO role with love and confidence. Each week, we'll explore everything from mindset shifts, leadership, optimal wellness, to efficient systems, all within a community of visionary women like you. Ready to get real about building a business and life you love? Hit subscribe and let's start this transformative journey together. Hello, love. Today we are joined by the lovely Emelie Johnson. With over 15 years of experience in graphic design and marketing, it's safe to say that this whole branding thing's kind of her jam. Emelie's career has been a dynamic blend of agency and freelance endeavors, allowing her to work on a diverse range of brands. As an art director and creative director, she has led brand concept development, fostered client relationships and communication, actively contributed to department innovation, and from crafting creative deliverables to building strong client and vendor relationships. She sees every project as an opportunity to innovate and inspire. When she's not immersed in design, you can find her hosting kitchen dance parties with her daughters, devouring a good book, and dreaming about her next adventure. So welcome, Emelie. I'm so excited and incredibly honored that you are joining me on the podcast. For those that don't know you yet, I would love for you to share a little bit more about you personally before we dive into all this business juiciness.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica, for that warm welcome. Really grateful to be here, and I'm excited to, jump into our conversation. But just to get a little bit, more information about myself beyond sort of what I do, which I think is kind of covered in that intro. But I am also somebody who, I love exploring creativity. And I think that's a big theme that I try to pull through in my life. I am a bookworm, which you kind of mentioned. So I love reading books, collecting books, hoarding books. I'm deeply drawn to sort of the concept of creative expression. So whether that's writing or painting or physical movement, using that as sort of a language of self-expression is something that's really important to me. I love being outdoors. I am an animal lover, as well as a parent. So I have two daughters that definitely keep me really busy. And in terms of where I'm from, I grew up in Ladner, BC, which is about 30 minutes outside of Vancouver. And I currently reside in Tsawwassen. So that's sort of the background information beyond all the, designer, entrepreneur, creative director information. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. So let's start way at the very beginning. Before you became who you are today, what were you up to? Were you in school for a specific, career? What did you have in mind? Did you always have a plan to start up your business?
Yeah. I think kind of going back, when I think of what winding journey sort of led me here, I look back at, even childhood. I think I was always a very hands-on creative child. And I think that was very much due to the fact that although both of my parents weren't in sort of creative fields, they were both very talented, creative humans. And they definitely fostered an environment of exploration and having access to play in a way that, it was a blessing, because I sort of had everything at my fingertips in terms of, access to craft supplies through my mom or little sort of drawing sessions with my dad. And so I think that just from a very early age really fostered that sense of just expressing yourself creatively. And then, I went into school, and in high school, I was exposed to graphic design, and we had an amazing graphic design program at my high school. And I think that in itself was such an asset, because we were able to learn these skills, at a time when graphic design was not what it is now. And it was very much hands-on and working with sort of physical, tactile layouts and putting pieces together, working with photography in the dark room, and then slowly kind of getting exposed to software and things that obviously have, evolved a lot at this point. And then when I went to post-secondary, I sort of had this moment of being like, oh, well, I can't make a living. I can't make a career in anything creative. So I've got to go, straight academics. And I attended university for a year with a completely academic workload and realized very quickly that I was spending way too much time making my flashcards, these beautiful masterpieces, and having to do like little diagrams with each flashcard. And I sort of had this moment of being like, okay, I think maybe this isn't the path that is going to provide me the fulfillment I need. And started looking at alternatives, and then ended up the following year enrolling in an amazing local program where we studied graphic design for marketing. And so I did my undergraduate in that, and kind of graduated, spent a couple years traveling, and then I should say traveling, freelancing, contracting, serving. It was those kind of like early 20s years of just trying to find your way in the world before, settling back into a routine and diving into the agency world, and, kind of starting my career at that point and building up the foundation of what made me sort of the designer and the creative that I am today.
Amazing. Now, stepping into a role of an entrepreneur is very different than working for someone else.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you? Starting your business. I mean, like, okay, it's not just creative designing and branding and whatnot. There's just so much more that comes along with this whole business thing. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I think, with entrepreneurship, there is a huge aspect of it that is sort of that independent mindset. It's not necessarily thinking that I can do this better, but maybe it's that thought of I maybe can do this differently. And that's an approach that I want to explore. And so, through the years of working sort of with a team, working under a creative director, I had a lot of experiences that I feel were probably my inner entrepreneurship trying to shine through. And I just wasn't maybe fully acknowledging that. So, I had 2 mat leaves during the time that I was employed. And on both of those mat leaves, I started a business because I can never just have a hobby. So for one, I started making soap and quickly had to turn that into a business, and actually, had a lot of success with it. And it was super fun. And then, I kind of changed what I wanted to do with that, and ended up kind of closing up shop there, all while going back to, pursuing the work that I was doing. But I think it's those sort of that desire to create something of your own and to be able to kind of harness that way of thinking and the way of approaching it. So I think that I always knew that was something that I wanted to pursue and be able to work for myself and have a little bit more direction in what that looked like. But I think for me, it came down to timing. And I believe that I was always aware that time was going to, come, and I would know when that was. And it did. And that's really when my entrepreneurship journey started.
Amazing. So what have been the biggest lessons, learning opportunities and whatnot that you've experienced that made the greatest impact on your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I mean, I think how we sort of gather these lessons is such an overlap of life experience and work experience, right? We, gather these different insights from people we meet or maybe experiences that we have. But I think when I start to look at the things that impact how I run my business or how I structure my day, I think it's a few key things. One, I think it's that balance is a long game. I think balance is something that is an element that a lot of entrepreneurs are seeking when they maybe step away from their corporate jobs or sort of the structure of employment. And I think that there is a sense of maybe defeat when entrepreneurs quickly realize that, I left a 9 to 5 to work a 24/7. And I think especially in those early days, you can be kind of hard on yourself in thinking that, what am I doing wrong? I'm not living a balanced lifestyle. I love what I'm doing. I love my business, but this isn't balance. This is, I'm working myself to the bone. And I think it's having the mindset that, with entrepreneurship, there's no rush. There's no sort of race to the finish line. And it's accepting the fact that, you have to stay consistent and be adaptive, and that over time you're going to learn what that balance looks like for you, because it is not the same for everybody. And that's just going to come from experience. And I think it's, it's a matter of giving yourself grace to acknowledge that and learn that about yourself in your business. And then I think too, on that note, I said, life experience and work experience overlap. And I think that's a huge lesson that I've learned, that I think for many years, I used to try and compartmentalize my personal life and my professional life, because you kind of want to show up one way in both, right? You want to be XYZ in your professional life and show that you can, do your job and meet your deadlines and produce really great work. And that forms such a huge part of your identity. But then, of course, you have all these layers of your personal life, and that can be the good and the bad. And trying to keep those two separate, all you're doing is sort of creating a persona and creating an act. And people see through that very quickly. And I think if we can sort of allow ourselves to find that beautiful space between the two, and live in that state where you're using your life experience and your work experience to form, that structure of your life. I think that is, it's honestly, I think it's where the magic happens. And I think it's a really good lesson to sort of acknowledge. And then I think another good one is keeping in mind that resilience. I think that's something that we hear a lot with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have to be super resilient, and it's almost like, overdone the amount of times that we hear that, like, you have to be so resilient. But I think it's a good reminder that, resilience it's not something that you earn, but it's something that you sort of forge in your setbacks and your wins and maybe the mistakes you made. And, it doesn't have to be a badge of honor or a reason to throw in the towel, but it is, at the end of the day, those experiences impact how you do what you do. And so again, I think it's that matter of really being able to embrace that and find that space where you're living authentically, you're doing work authentically, and it's a reflection of, your experience in your field, but also of the experiences that you've had in life.
I love that. Those are great lessons. So I hope that everyone tuning in is getting a little bit out of that, because it hits really at the core of the journey itself, which is so important. And we can often get super lost in that journey. So it's good to be reminded of these things.
Yeah, totally.
Right, so let's kind of dive into a little bit more of the personal aspect. So you spoke about creativity not just as a skill, but as a daily tool for personal growth and business success. So I want you to elaborate a little bit more on how this practice has transformed your approach to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I think for myself, one thing that's really had a big impact on my work and sort of how I run my business now is that, we hear a lot about wellness. We hear a lot about self-care and allowing, the time in our busy schedules to take care of ourselves. Because I think as business owners and as entrepreneurs, we often overwork ourselves. We don't want to say no. We put a lot on our plate. Burnout is, so common among entrepreneurs. And you're kind of told time and time again, go be active, or go to a yoga class, or, find that thing to you that is self-care, right? And I think for myself, it's this concept of creativity equals wellness. And in the same way that we practice meditation or we practice yoga, I think there's a really powerful growth in practicing creativity. So if we think of it as, a muscle, some people are predisposed to be maybe a little bit more athletic than others, but there's always an opportunity to train and to really hone in a skill. You don't get up one morning and run a marathon, you train for it, right? So I think there's a lot of people that get stuck in the idea of being sort of I'm not a painter, so I'm not creative, or I don't have a creative bone in my body. I think that's one thing we hear a lot. And I just think it's again, it's kind of goes back to that thought of just doing it. And whether that's, scribbling, kind of brain dumping thoughts and doodles in a notebook, or finding something that is maybe more in tune with a skill that you have, whether that is like creative writing or writing poetry, or movement, right? Like there's so much creative expression in movement, whether that's dance or, putting in music and going for a walk. So I think a lot of the things that we know as self-care practices actually tap into this idea of creative well-being. So that's something that I really strive to bring into my daily practice, because especially working in a creative field, I think for many years I struggled with creative burnout. So when when your work and your livelihood sort of is based around the fact that you have to be generating ideas and creatively bringing those to life and executing said ideas, that you don't want to go home and then sort of do it all over again, right? So I think it's identifying that creativity is, it's different in different facets. So the creative muscles that I use when I'm, working and building brands is very different than sort of how I would express myself, writing poetry or having those kitchen dance parties with my girls, right? So I think it's acknowledging that and just trying to take those moments out of your day to practice that.
I love that. I mean, I'm not in the creative space, but I do find even with my own expertise, the creativity aspect is
Mm,
something that I'm trying to continuously work on, because we do get so heads down that we kind of don't use that muscle as much as we should. And
mhm.
then we do get kind of in a slump. So for me, I'm like thinking about all these different things that I could be doing, and like playing piano. I'm like,
Yep, absolutely.
that's something that could spark some joy and like kind of tap into that creativity a little bit and exercise that muscle a little bit in order to
Hmm.
help me in the different areas of my business and life. So I
Yeah.
love
And I
that.
think totally. And I think when you're doing those things for yourself, there's no pressure to execute at any specific level. So you're not going on the piano to, perform this perfect piece of music. You are really just expressing emotions through, a physical movement, and then hearing that back through your ears and sort of what emotional impact that has on you. I think at the end of the day too, like creativity is problem solving. And I don't really know many jobs or industries where problem solving is not a huge part of your daily work, whether you're in accounting or, managing a fitness or a gym facility, you're constantly problem solving. And so that idea generation is going to happen a lot quicker and a lot more reliable if you're flexing those muscles more often.
Absolutely. Now, with creativity burnout, you being primarily in that industry where you
Yeah.
have to be coming up with these ideas, many people do experience that burnout where they're just like,
Yeah.
I can't, I'm like tapped out. What has helped you get out of that state?
Yeah. I think, when we think about lessons as well and things that have impacted my entrepreneurial journey, I think that acknowledgement of burnout is so huge, because burnout is not an overnight thing. It happens slowly, and often we are aware that it's happening, but there are so many demands, whether it's in, deadlines and deliverables, or things that are going on in your personal lives, responsibilities you have with your family, those things don't go away. So it is very hard to stop and, pause when you feel that those things are stacking up. And that's just on top of, maybe the root thing that's causing your burnout. Something that's really important is practicing mindfulness, so that you're learning your own pointers. You're learning the things about yourself that you recognize as those early onsets of the burnout, right? So unfortunately, it's probably not something that's going to happen the first time you get burned out. But once you've been through that a few times and you've seen maybe those steps start to compile, I think the biggest thing is really practicing mindfulness. being aware that, if you can start to take that pause and deal with things at an earlier moment, that you will, potentially avoid the fallout of a full sort of burnout, which, if you've been through, is not a pretty sight. So I think for myself personally, that was a huge point of pursuing, working for myself and developing my own schedule, so that I could allow those moments and have a little bit more flexibility to pause and to kind of give myself grace and know my limits and know that I can't deliver, the work that I want to do if I'm functioning in a state of burnout. And nobody can. We think we can. We think we can keep going with it. But at the end of the day, like, it goes back to self-care, and it goes back to, just acknowledging that, we need to support ourselves. And whether that comes from, inner work and honing in on some of that, self-expression and knowing yourself, or it means asking for help. Because I think, especially with entrepreneurs, we struggle with that sometimes. And it's, obviously something that is highly impactful when you have that support team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up the self-awareness piece, because even when I was working through some blocks that I was having, the coach that I was working with specifically was like, awareness is the biggest piece of the puzzle in order to overcoming whatever it is you are struggling with. That piece is often overlooked, but when you bring awareness to it, it helps you with the next steps and whatnot.
Absolutely.
But it's like the biggest piece of the puzzle. And yeah, I absolutely agree. We often think that we have to figure it all out ourselves, but asking for help, there's nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in it. Everybody needs some help once in a while. And, you can't be an expert in everything. You can't know it all. And sometimes we need to bring somebody else in to kind of see where the gaps are and to help guide us through some things. And there's absolutely no shame in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, this term solopreneur, which I didn't really hear until we kind of were coming through the pandemic. But I think it's a term of pressure that I think people put on themselves. We're all familiar with what an entrepreneur is. And I think this idea that you have to call yourself a solopreneur if you're sort of a one-man show or one-woman show. But I think then it doesn't acknowledge the fact that you'll never find an entrepreneur that doesn't say that they have a support team. Whether that's, people that they hire and are on their team and are, supporting specific roles within their business, or it is, the relationships that they have outside of their work and the way that provides assurance and, validation when they need it. So as much as I sort of, love the idea of the solopreneur and being independent and sort of forging your own path, I think, it's good to remember that even if it's only you sort of running your business, that it's absolutely okay to acknowledge and appreciate and need that outer support group as well.
You absolutely need that support system around you, whether that's team or outside and whatnot. It's not a solo journey. You can't get to that end destination by yourself. It's just not going to happen.
Not in a healthy way.
No. So let's talk about creative well-being. I love this term that you've indicated. How do you integrate it into your day-to-day operations and then your long-term business strategy?
Yeah. I think day-to-day, it has been a matter of sort of knowing a few practices that help me and support me, because I think that's the other thing is support doesn't always have to be people. It can be practices as well, right? Support me to continue delivering work that, I'm proud of and that supports my clients. So things like having different places, maybe where you work for different tasks. So, we work in brand development. So yes, there's a huge component of my work where I am doing conceptual creative work. But, that's actually, I don't do it as much as I would want to. There's a big part of my day-to-day work that is administrative stuff. And it is, meetings and speaking with clients and, all the back end stuff that comes with running a business. So those type of tasks, those more, structured, focused tasks, I work really great at a desk. I want to I want to sit, I want to be structured. And, maybe I have music on or an audiobook, but, that's sort of a traditional space where I can do those tasks. When I am, doing conceptual work, which is, the period where I'm brainstorming. So coming up with ideas, generating ideas, maybe they're not all going to come to fruition, but it's that point where I'm just sort of exploring. I like to be cozy and I like to be comfortable. So maybe I'm sitting, in a different part of my office and I'm on a comfortable chair and I have like a pull-up desk where I can sketch on. Or I might even just go out for a walk and start sort of like thinking about some of the questions that I discussed with clients in our kickoff session. And I think that practice of stepping outside of your traditional space of working is huge in generating a sense of well-being while supporting that sort of creative process. I think as well, it's acknowledging that creative block is real. And I don't just mean creative block for people that are, artists or writers, but, going back to the idea of creativity being problem solving, that you could be sitting at your desk and, you're dealing with a complex situation, regardless of what industry or your job title. And you feel that block. You can't problem solve. You're not coming up with the solutions that you want to, or that you can produce. And so it's sort of being able to shift your mindset and sort of refresh your thinking. So whether that is, again, kind of going back and doing a brain dump. So maybe writing in a journal, getting some things out of your mind that are putting you in that position of feeling stuck. It could be doodles. It could be, again, like playing some music or taking a 10-minute dance break. When I worked in agency, we would often, a couple of us would go out and go for a walk around the block just to sort of, breathe some fresh air and sort of reinvigorate yourself. And it's amazing the impact of taking that pause and having that moment to sort of, tap into a different side of your brain can then, ultimately help support the task at hand.
I love that. All right. So this kind of leads me into another side of how we work as individuals. We're all very different. So navigating entrepreneurship as a neurodivergent, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what that is so that, those tuning in that might not be aware, they might be able to resonate and be like, oh, okay, I have that. So let's talk about the unique challenges and what exactly neurodivergent means, and then how you've adapted your business practices to manage those effectively.
Yeah. So neurodivergent is a bit of an umbrella term to cover, a few different things: autism, ADHD, dyslexia. I believe there are a couple other terms that fall under that umbrella. And I also think that there's some evolution there too, that maybe that will also expand in the future. But for myself, the one that's applicable is ADHD. So I received an ADHD diagnosis in the early part of 2023. And, it was actually an extremely profound experience for myself. And I think was a huge player in my transition to, full-time self-employment and entrepreneurship. With ADHD, in terms of how it impacts, myself on a daily basis, and especially looking back at the experiences that I've had growing up and coming up through, early adulthood, it's hard. It creates a lot of self-limiting elements, I guess. The burnout is very, very common with ADHD. We generally, in our sort of natural state, go between these periods of being extremely creative, strong and powerful idea generation, and wanting to sort of conquer and do all of these things and bring all of these ideas to life. But then as a result, you often kind of go into a period of burnout. And I think when you don't have, I guess, a reason to understand why you're kind of cycling through those things, it can create, a lot of negative self feelings and self-talk. And that's obviously doesn't support, success in any way, right? So I think having that diagnosis now, the biggest impact it provided for me was awareness and giving giving myself the grace to understand that when I am feeling this way about this thing, it's not because I am less than or because, I'm not capable. It's actually just because my brain is wired a little bit differently and it's processing this information a little bit differently. So, I've been able to use that knowledge because I think that's a huge aspect of it too, is just having more knowledge and awareness of what ADHD actually means, especially for women. We've seen a huge influx of women, especially, women in their 30s and 40s and 50s receiving diagnoses now that have lived an entire, life potentially where they've maybe come up with these struggles time and time again, and they don't have an understanding of why they were sort of facing those consistent setbacks. Why am I not learning from my experiences and bettering myself? And you're seeing these diagnoses now come because there's so much more understanding and education around how and why it impacts women and girls differently maybe than men and boys. And unfortunately, a lot of our diagnosis standards are based on a young boy. So it's understanding what it means, how that applies to your life, and then being able to ideally, create a space that supports your way of thinking rather than trying to feel like you're always working against yourself. So that was a big driver for me, was to create a working life that supported that rather than feeling like you're going against the grain.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what have you found to be the most helpful
Yeah.
ways of managing the ADHD while you're working on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
Like how, because I can't put myself in your shoes. I don't know
Yeah.
what it's like to experience it. So how does it affect your day-to-day? And then what do you do to set yourself up for success?
Yeah. I think there's kind of two parts to this answer. And one is, you know, like I said, there's a lot of self-discovery and there's a lot of self sort of work to do in being able to kind of understand patterns too. So I think it goes back to that, the acknowledgement of understanding signs of burnout, for example. So whereas in the past I might, just be pushing through those stages, I try to acknowledge that at a much earlier stage now, and create space so that I can, support a better way of working. That being said, that's not always easy, nor does it sometimes feel possible, right? And so I think it's a matter of also being aware that, with any season or chapter of life, there's ups and there's downs, and there's periods where we are head down and working, and we have, a lot of deadlines, and we have a lot of things that have to, get off our desk, and that there's also periods where maybe you do have more opportunity for pause. So I think understanding that balance is key, for at least for my approach. And then the other side of it is that, with an ADHD diagnosis, you have medication that is available to you. And so I started medication when I received my diagnosis, and that was ultimately, a life-changing experience because it balanced my dopamine levels, and it allowed me to function at a much more stable baseline. So as much as, that awareness and that education is a huge part of how I structure my day now, I can't sort of disregard the fact that medication is a huge support to how I run my business. And I think that it's something that, we've seen in the past. There's obviously sometimes, feelings of not really wanting to speak about that, or maybe even like joking about it. I think that's something that we see a lot in the workplace, like joking about medication, or like when people get stressed out, even things like take a chill pill, right? And so I think it's important to acknowledge that it does play an important role, and it can really make such a huge impact in supporting people to do great work and to live really, really fulfilling and supported lives.
Yeah, there's such a stigma around taking medications, and there's a time and a place for everything. And while I personally enjoy more of the natural root approach type thing, medication prescriptions still come into play when it's needed. And if it's affecting the way that you're living on a day-to-day basis, why wouldn't you look at that as an option? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in it. A close family member of mine was struggling so badly with their mental health and whatnot. And at that time, they needed medication in order to be able to stabilize and to be able to have a better quality of life and whatnot. And there's no shame in that. You know what I mean? There's
No.
nothing wrong with that.
Well, and it's such a beautiful thing to witness the impact that something as simple as a deficiency in something that can be helped. And there's no qualms about taking deficiency or vitamins for deficiencies, or supplementing our nutrition when we're low in something. And I think having a chemical imbalance it it has a huge impact. And whether or not you decide to go the route of medication for I'm not just ADHD, but something else that might be aided by that, it's also not something that has to be forever in some cases, right? And I think there are a lot of holistic approaches to managing ADHD. It's not, it's not medication or chaos. Those are not like the two ends of the spectrum. There is so much space in the middle to, to develop strategies and to develop ways of managing your ADHD. There's absolutely ways that you can help it with nutrition, with vitamins and supplements. What I think of as, or how I think of medication is a tool. It's a tool that you can have in your toolbox to help you, feel your best. And maybe sometimes you don't, or maybe sometimes you need that more than others. And as you kind of can start to manage that and have that self-awareness, there's always an opportunity to lean into some of those more holistic approaches. And that's really the journey, right? We have the time to explore that. And I think it's going to be individual for each person, but regardless of what route, there's certainly, no shame, no stigma. And I think the more that people are talking about it, the more awareness there is for that.
Yeah, it's way more prevalent than we think it is.
Absolutely.
Everyone struggles with something.
Yeah.
Right? There's something for everyone, whether that's mental illness or physical health or anything like that. There's lots going on with everybody, and there's no shame in any of that. And why struggle when you could have something that supports you and helps you get through the day more easily, right? There's nothing
totally.
wrong with that.
Yeah. And I think too, on that, on this point of working and livelihood, I feel too that there are a lot of people with ADHD often lean towards entrepreneurship because they maybe need more flexibility, more room, more space to kind of express themselves and explore these ideas that are kind of popping off in their head. That being said, there is such a powerful place for neurodivergence in the workplace, so in the corporate world and in employment. And it's a matter of, if you can create a business, so even a small business, right? Bringing on these people into your team and supporting them, which can be done with really simple strategies. It can be such an asset because if you have someone on your team that's has ADHD and they're amazing, they can come up with way more ideas potentially, right? How can you support them so that they're in a space that they feel safe and supported, so that you're actually nurturing those ideas and you're nurturing the things that are potentially strengths rather than setbacks. And I think that is something that has come out of the maybe increase and awareness of ADHD, is that you're seeing changes in the workplace to better support how people work and process information. And it's certainly something that I've become much more aware of since my diagnosis, that, when I'm working with teams, that we don't all process information or receive information the same way, right? So especially when I'm in sort of more directive roles, how I give feedback or work with one person, it might be totally different than how I relay that information to somebody else. And at the end of the day, it comes down to taking the time to know people, know how they best work and how they best process information, and just having, some room for flexibility to work with that rather than against it.
I love that. Now, I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your expertise, because you have so much value to share there as well. So you specialize in web design and branding. Can you share how your approach to design has evolved over the years, especially the last, I would say, year or two, with the introduction of AI and like all these different tools that are coming up?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's actually a really good segue from what we were just talking about, because I think with my approach to brand development, the biggest thing that I have changed, because with the industry that I'm in, there is, a deep connection to sort of advancing technology and software, like you mentioned, obviously with the introduction of AI, and just sort of functionality that we have within, web platforms and programs. There is at the core a very deep, I believe, reliance on relationships. So my approach to how I work with clients now versus maybe 10 years ago, it is really to lean into that relationship and lean into the story. My studio, we work with both personal brands and small businesses. So obviously personal brands, there's maybe a little bit more opportunity to get down into the layers of what, that particular person has lived and has, brought them to a point where they're at, developing their personal brand. Sure, you might get a little bit more into the deeper side of things quicker, but there's so much opportunity for small businesses to lean into their story, the narrative, the heart, the relationship of their team. And, obviously there's a time and a place for everything. And that comes with, understanding the business and understanding their services and their offer. But even with the most sort of industrial, companies that I've worked with, there is always opportunity to infuse heart and story into what you're doing. So, regardless of what website platform you're on, or sort of the functionality of your user experience, there's something so powerful about leaning into narrative, and you're not going to be able to get to that point unless you're leaning into relationships. So that is probably the biggest sort of change that I've had over the years, and I think that has come with experience, as well as, life experience too, right? Being able to know the impact of some of the things we've talked about, even today, and how that impacts things, and just giving everybody the opportunity to kind of, lean into their own story.
Amazing. I love that. Now, user experience, you've kind of touched on that a little bit. So let's dive into that. User
Yeah.
experience is absolutely crucial when it comes to engagement, when it comes to conversion, which we are all trying to do. What have been the latest innovations in user experience design projects that you've been on?
Yeah. I think with UX and user experience, there's a level of making things overly complex when they don't need to be. At the end of the day, like, my approach to user experience is a human approach. So when we are, creating designs for humans, it's really a matter of creating something that is going to reach more humans, be able to be easily understood. Accessibility is a huge aspect of UX. And I think at the end of the day, it's something that is overcomplicated. When you walk into a store, a physical, brick and mortar store, you don't want to have to shuffle through racks and racks of clothing to get to, this feature outfit at the back of the store. Those are put up front, they're showcased, you can point to them, that's the one, let's go. And I think that aspect is really well understood in the physical sense of stores. However, it seems to be like hard to understand in the website world. At the end of the day, people are coming to a website, users are coming to a website to get certain information, whether that's to book something, to purchase something, or to learn more information. There's not ever one reason that somebody is going to come to your site. So you need to be able to create paths, or create user journeys, we call them, that are easy and intuitive. So that is also going to come full circle back to understanding who is the audience and what is the relationship that they have with this particular business. So I think at the end of the day, like, yes, there's you could read books and blogs and podcasts, and you can absorb all the information. And, working in this industry, it is really important to stay on top of all that stuff. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to remember that it's humanistic design. It's how we connect and how we engage and how we communicate information in a way that is easy and accessible, so that more people are able to consume that in a way that is not limiting or only relevant to certain people.
I love that. Now, when it comes to being up and up on the latest and whatnot, how have you utilized AI in your business? Like, what has it helped you in being able to maybe do more of, or to save you time and whatnot?
Yeah. I think AI in the way that a lot of people are consuming it right now, because obviously it's going to be different probably by the end of the year. It is, it's an asset to a lot of small businesses. It is a tool that can help alleviate teams. Maybe, when we're talking about entrepreneurs, and maybe that's one person or, a very small team. I think that there is a role that AI can play to support those, that team. I think that relying on AI is a misstep. I believe really, really strongly in the power of story and the power of, our unique journeys and messaging, and how that sort of weaves into that whole experience, going back to, UX. With AI, I think as long as we are using it in a way that is forwarding, the goals of your business or your values, that's okay. But I don't think that it is a great asset for businesses if you are relying solely on that tool to replace, a team member. So, for example, like, obviously, I think we can all relate to using Chat GPT. I think that's sort of a really common, well-known AI tool. And obviously, people have used it a lot in website copy, for social media captions. And it's simple. You can take, your information about your business, plop it in there, say, this is what I need, bang, 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 and it shoots you out something. The problem is that somebody else can put in very similar details and have a similar output. So where that value is having, that starting point. And I think that's a great asset, because, copy takes a lot of time, and, maybe you're not able to afford or bring on a copywriter. And so I think it's a great starting point, but where you have the opportunity to then further elevate that structure is by really having a deep understanding of your business, your values, your missions, your tone of voice, what your purpose is, because all of those things can then be sort of taken to further sort of massage that copy and that content and actually create something that still feels very, authentic to the business. Because at the end of the day, like, there's nothing worse than, seeing copy online and you can just tell that it's like generated from Chat GPT. There's an overuse of adjectives, it's just, you can just tell. So I think it's a great tool to support businesses. It's a good way to, kind of alleviate some tasks on the to-do list. But I think you can't sort of overstep the fact that you still need to be able to infuse your own story and your own narrative into that.
Absolutely. It is just a starting off point.
Yeah. And for that, it's, amazing. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about what you have available to support your community. What are your offers? Share it all with us now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my business, Embermake, we support brand development. So we work with, like I said, small businesses as well as individuals. So, professional individuals or even individuals that are corporate employed, but maybe they have sort of their own offerings that they want to support, and they sort of need their own identity outside of that corporate umbrella. We love working with those because we totally can lean into story and create something really unique for them. But traditionally, we work with small businesses. So we are a brand first studio. We love story. We love supporting the strategy of a small business. So I think that is something that then adds a lot of depth. So really diving into a business and helping them identify what is their sort of unique differentiator and how that actually shapes and informs their messaging, their values. We love helping businesses develop like a why statement and their purpose, because that in part is like the foundation of their brand. So we always start with a strategy when we can, and then we can do full brand identity, website development, and design. So really creating custom experience in the brand world for our clients. So you can visit us at embermake.com, and we have a couple of brand programs, both tailored to small business and individuals, as well as a number of standalone services that we can support with as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your journey, your expertise, but also providing some awareness and insights when it comes to neurodivergence and ADHD and how to manage that as an entrepreneur. I hope that this has helped those tuning in that might be experiencing some things in order to navigate that journey a little bit more with ease. But thank you so much, Emelie. It's been lovely having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. Your presence truly elevates Love Unplugged into a home for freedom-driven women who aspire to be visionary CEOs. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd be honored if you take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us bring more impactful conversations to our community. Let's continue to grow this empowering community together. Until next time.